Hey folks, Jesse Bayer here with Abundant Living Ecuador, coming to you today from Loja in southern Ecuador. It is Wednesday, February 8th, just about a week and a half before we have national elections in Ecuador. Really interesting time. I think these elections, which are for president and Congress, will really go a long way to shaping certainly the economic and financial future of the country, at least near term. Probably runoff elections on April 2nd. So interesting time here in Ecuador. Anyhow, I just wanted to make this quick video for you on the real estate purchase process here in Ecuador, something we get a lot of questions on. A lot of people, are really just wanting to know the basics. So here's the basics. Starting with, there is no restrictions of any kind I shouldn't say of any kind, but there is no restrictions to foreign ownership of property in Ecuador. So you can purchase property as a foreigner. You can do so from abroad. You don't literally ever have to step foot in Ecuador to own property here. You don't have to be here for a certain amount of time, nothing. The only caveat to that is that if you're buying property that borders another country, so Peru or Colombia or Brazil, although that's in the middle of the rainforest, or the ocean, you have to get special permission, but that permission is rubber stamped, so no big deal there. So no restrictions to foreign ownership. That brings us to the process. So obviously, you have to come to an agreement with a seller, and that's the first step. Once you have an agreement in place, and or you're during negotiations or whatever, during that general period of time, you need to do your due diligence, and you need to keep in mind that in Ecuador there's no title insurance. So your due diligence is really, really important and very much on you. Self-responsibility kind of reigns here on the due diligence of buying property in Ecuador. So because there's no title insurance, and because really, and I'll get into this a little more maybe in a minute, but each municipio kind of does things a little bit differently. Some are more strict as to making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed prior to allowing a deal to close, and some will allow, as long as the paperwork submitted will basically allow the deal to close. So again, due diligence is really on you. First and foremost, you want to check have a civil engineer do a boundary study and check to make sure how much land is actually there. If the title doesn't have a map already that with GPS points, so with the coordinates pointed out and the amount of land very clear, because the way titles traditionally were done in Ecuador were kind of, to that tree, to that rock, to that stream, to this guy's land, and then they just kind of put a number as to how many hectares or whatever, or square meters. So unless it's been surveyed recently or it's changed hands recently and the municipio forced them to do an official survey with a civil engineer and GPS, you don't know how much land is there. So that's first and foremost. Check that, get a boundary study done. Secondarily, you need to check for the ownership, that there's no debts, liens, etc. on the property. And you also need to check for land use restrictions. So that would include things like, is there a mining concession already given out on the land? Is there water rights that have been applied for by other people or the land itself? Are there any restrictions in the area to the use of land, of the land that you're purchasing? So that's really important. Okay, so now you've got your deal in place, you've researched everything, everything's clear between you and the seller. There's kind of two options as to how to proceed with the sale. Option number one, which both kind of have their upside and downside, and both are sort of applicable depending on the details of the sale. Number one is to sign what's called a promesa de compra-venta, which is basically a purchase and sale agreement, or as we would say where I'm from, just a contract. So if you sign a promesa, that promesa, it goes before the notary. There's a significant fee involved in that, which is the downside. The upside is that the deal is much more concrete. You're skin in the game for both sides. Generally, a promesa is done with a deposit and then also a penalty should the seller ultimately not fulfill his part and sell the property to you. And then, of course, that whatever's negotiated, the terms of the promesa are put in writing and notarized, which makes them extremely binding here in Ecuador. And you can then have your period of time before you close with relative peace of mind. Again, the downside there is the costs. Notaries here calculate their fees based off of the value of the transaction. So if you're signing a promesa, you're basically getting charged by the notary to close the deal twice. The other way is just to close. The other option is just to close. That is fine as long as the deal is relatively simple, that there's not a lot of stipulations between the buyer and seller as to terms that have to be met, fulfilled, or met prior to closing. You can simply close. Well, let's talk about closing times for a minute. You can close a deal in Ecuador much more quickly than you can, in the States, for example. Depending on the municipio, again, some can approve paperwork very, very quickly within a few days for a closing. Others, it'll take a few weeks. Depending on the municipio, you can potentially hit snags as well. Should there not be a clear survey, or should the title not be exactly as they would like. So you can hit snags depending on the municipio and depending on the closing. So let's talk process. So now let's say you did a promesa, so you've done your due diligence, you have a deal in place, you signed the promesa, and now you're ready to close. So the paperwork is submitted to the municipio. It's a trámite. It's submitted to the municipio. They approve. Once they approve the transfer of dominion, of title or deed, then both parties, buyer and seller, go in front of the notary to sign, or those who are representing them go to sign. Once the transfer of title is signed in front of the notary, that is then submitted to the property register to be inscribed at the property register. Once the property register inscribes the new title or the deed and issues the new title in the new owner's name, the transaction is complete. So those are the basics. Let's get into, for a second, and I'll do some other videos in the future on some of these other topics like valuation, etc. But foreigners are essentially shut out of the mortgage market in Ecuador. You've got to banks essentially, or banks generally require 3 years of being a citizen, or a resident, of having a cedula, which is a national ID card, before they'll lend foreigners money. So if you're trying to come to Ecuador, you're essentially shut out of the mortgage market here, of the debt markets. So if you need financing, you can on a case-by-case basis. Some sellers are open to holding some debt. Generally speaking here, if a seller is willing to do some owner financing, generally speaking, the terms are something like, you give half up front, and then you have another 6 months or another year or so to come up with the rest. Usually they're not super long-term arrangements, but again, it's case-by-case. So that's the majority of the closing process and parameters. Let me think really quick if I missed anything. I think that covers at least the very basics of due diligence and process. I would definitely recommend that you have legal counsel through all of this. That you oversee the process yourself. If you're not having somebody who's very experienced doing it, do it for you. You really need to manage your affairs and make sure that everything is done properly, and that you're buying what you think you're buying, with the ability to do on it what you would like to do on it. These of course are all things that we do, and we'd be happy to help you, of course, with any aspects of your move to Ecuador, purchase in Ecuador, investments in Ecuador, etc. You can find us at abecuador.com. That's our website. You can, of course, find us on Facebook, Abundant Living Ecuador. We're on YouTube. We're just about everywhere. You can email me at jtbayer, J as in John, T as in Thomas, Bayer like the aspirin, at abecuador.com. We got an 800 number from US and Canada, 888-999-0948. And that should do it. So I'll get these next couple of videos out as well shortly. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please like and comment and rate and subscribe, and help us spread the word. And have a great day. Take care, folks.